Om Jnanatimirandasya Gananjana Salakaya Chakshu Unminitam Nena Dasmashi Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Mangayate Gani Yadkripa Tamaham Vande Shivanam Divatananam Nama Om Vishnu Gadaya Krishna Prestaya Bhutale Shrimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namane Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharane Nirvishesha Shanyavadi Pastachade Satarane Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Good evening, dear devotees. I was requested to speak on a connected topic to our last topic which we discussed, which is, can anybody summarize it very simply? Last topic. What is what? What is association? What is not association? And excuse me for keeping something in my mouth, but my throat is a little raw and I need to lubricate it. We are reading from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's essays on two important verses from Srila Rupa Goswami's Upadeshamrita. One verse where he was describing six qualities which are favorable for devotional service, and the other ones were saying he was describing six which are unfavorable. And the last topic we were speaking about association, avoiding the association or abandoning the association of non-devotees. What does it mean to abandon their association? And we tried to present it in the way that he had presented it, and it centered on one very important verse from Upadeshamrita. Should I test them? Does anybody know the verse that was that Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes the limit of what is association, how to know where we passed the limit and where we stayed within the proper limits, even though we're in physical proximity of non-devotees. Because one thing we concluded last time, or didn't conclude it, but we established it quite soundly, there's no way to avoid being in the physical proximity of non-devotees. Just forget it. I mean, unless you, and he suggested, unless you simply go to the forest and live alone in the forest. But there's a verse which he quoted which defines the limit of what is association and what is not association. And it was a very important verse in Upadeshamrita. If you can just give me the translation, I don't expect you to quote the Sanskrit. Yes.
It was about accepting and receiving gifts and having interactions with love. But I don't know the translation.
You got you're on it.
Yeah, so it's to not
just accepting gifts and giving gifts. There's 6 types of loving exchanges.
not do the 6 types of giving.
So those were 2, accepting and giving.
And then we have offering prasadam and
yes, and accepting prasadam.
Opening one's mind in confidence.
Very good. Yes, inquiring confidentially. Revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially. These 6 types of loving exchanges between devotees is the basis of friendship, given by Rupa Goswami, who is very, very important Vaishnava Acharya in our Sampradaya. And we talked basically the principle about giving and accepting, and the limit of giving and accepting is the word priti, sadvidam priti lakshanam. Priti means with affection, with love. And when there's love, that means one of the characteristics of love is there's no expectation of anything in return. It's done to please the object of one's affection. And the person who is on the receiving end is also, because there's love there, there's acceptance because of the love. Not because, oh, I've been waiting for you to give this to me. And or there's no kind of a mercantile exchange whatsoever in a loving relationship. It's freed from selfish motivations. And we define the limits based on this word priti, affection. When there's loving affection, genuine love according to our criteria of spiritual love. And we discussed all those details. I wouldn't say threadbare, but we discussed them at length. We went into that. And the reason why I reverted back to that is because we didn't discuss so much about revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially. And I said that there is a certain type of atmosphere which nourishes this kind of loving exchanges between devotees. Of course, first, there has to be trust. Nobody wants to reveal their mind, reveal confidential things about themselves to somebody they can't trust. And we did explain that if you don't trust the person that you're revealing your mind to can be confidential, then certainly you're going to be reserved and not say, what's something about yourself which may expose yourself and which may also come back in the future and someone could use against you. Sometimes devotees think that revealing one's mind in confidence means telling them what you really think about them. But that's not that's not what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is talking about. It's nice, actually, when there's really a loving exchange, and when there's really this sense of ego, false ego, is kind of eradicated from the relationship, and there's a trusting, of affectionate exchange that goes on, which is increasing and trust, then one may actually come to that point of telling them, because there's no envy, there's no pride, there's no hatred, there's no malice, right? In telling somebody something about themselves because you love them. And you can say something like that to them those four criteria are not my criteria. That's Bhaktivinoda Thakur's criteria. No envy, no hatred, no malice. And what was the fourth one I said? Huh? Pride. That's, of course, an advanced state of consciousness, especially when we said envy is something that's very, very prominent characteristic that we find in most people. And you find it amongst devotees, and it's the very reason why we're in the material world. It's the one, it's difficult, bad quality that's very difficult to become free from. And as we spoke of last time also, that there's no immediate switch to turn it off. It can only be gradually cleansed through bhakti. through associating, hearing and chanting about Krishna, especially associating in the process of, the most powerful process of bhakti is hearing about pure devotional service. In fact, there's a very wonderful verse in the 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, just spoken by Narada Muni in his conversation with Vasudeva. And it was somebody else was actually spoke the verse. It was one of the, I can't remember his name, but the verse is more important. That pure devotional service is so transcendently potent that simply by hearing about it, simply by glorifying it in response, simply by faithfully and respectfully accepting that it exists, simply by meditating on it, and simply by praising the service of others, these 5 types of criteria, then even a person who hates all demigods and is envious of all living entities in the universe can immediately become purified. So, I like this verse so much because it really gives anybody who's struggling with envy, gives them hope that even somebody like me who's struggling with envy, struggling with bad qualities, struggling with competitiveness, struggling with fault finding, it states in this verse, simply by faithfully and respectfully accepting that pure devotion exists. I may not have it. I may not have it. This is how we can think about ourselves. If one may say in confidence, I know I don't have it. But let's just, for conversation's sake, say, I may not have it. And but if I faithfully and respectfully accept that it exists, maybe not in me, but if I hear about it, it purifies me. Not only just hearing about it, but if I repeat what I heard about it, like sometimes I'll use different examples in the Bhagavatam. Here's a verse. Here's a verse that we can meditate on pure devotion, of a quality in a Vaishnava that we should emulate. You know this verse, I quote it a lot. Tiraskrita vipalam dakshaptak shipta hatahapi nasya tatpati kurvanti tadbhakta kavayobihi. Devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that even if they're cheated, neglected, insulted, cursed, neglected, cheated, cursed, disturbed, or even killed. Of course, we can talk about even killed, because we know that even if somebody's killed, they're going to carry that with them, into the next life. In fact, Prabhupada even suggests in one purport in the 6th canto of the Bhagavatam that Chitraketu Maharaj, when he had a son called Harsha Harsha means happiness and Shoka means distress. He was a son of great happiness and great distress. Why was he happy? Great happiness? Because Chitraketu Maharaj wanted nothing but a son. Everything he did to get a son. But why was he going to be a cause of distress? Because his son was killed by his envious co-wives. And Prabhupada suggested in the purport that it was an enemy in a previous life who took birth as Chitraketu Maharaj's son to get back at him. So we can say even killed. But devotees of the Lord are so inclined that if they're neither cheated, cursed, neglected, insulted, disturbed, or even killed, they're never inclined to take revenge. never inclined to avenge themselves. Imagine, somebody insults you and you just accept it. Somebody disturbs you, immediately our mind, the tendency of the mind is like, I'm going to get back at them somehow. Or what to speak if someone curses you. This verse was spoken about Parikshit Maharaj, who was cursed. He was cursed by Shringi, who was the son of Shamik Rishi. Do you know the story who Shamik Rishi? Who? Yes, okay, you got it. Garlanded a snake. Parikshit Maharaj garlanded a snake around his neck. And when Shringi found out that Parikshit Maharaj did this to his father, he was furious. And when his father came back to external consciousness, and the reason why he didn't greet Parikshit Maharaj was because he was absorbed in trance. He came back to external consciousness, he saw his son Shringi, and he said, why are you so disturbed? And he could immediately understand that Shringi had done something terrible. He had cursed Parikshit Maharaj to die by the snake bird. And then when Shamik Rishi understood what his son had done, he was thinking that such a pure soul as Parikshit Maharaj, he should have never been cursed. And thinking that my son needs to be appropriately punished for what he has done. He said the best arrangement would be if Parikshit Maharaj would counter-curse him. That would be the best punishment for him. But then he started to contemplate who was Parikshit Maharaj, and then he realized Duraskrita Vipalam Dakshaptakshitahapi. Devotees of the Lord are so forbearing that whether they're cheated, cursed, neglected, insulted, disturbed, even killed, they're never inclined to avenge themselves. So he realized that Parikshit Maharaj will never do that. His son will never get his just punishment. So at that point, he realized, I can only depend on the Lord. Let the Lord do what is necessary to be done to punish my son, because Parikshit Maharaj will never counter-curse, even though he has all power to do so. So, when we hear about such qualities of a Vaishnava, and we think, well, I can never do that. That's not me. I'm not so pure. But if we have faith that that kind of standard of purity exists, and if we hear about it, well, if we just talk about it, I mean, I'm getting some benefit by telling you this. I benefit. Because it's so important that simply by hearing about it, repeating it in response, simply by meditating on it, simply by faithfully and respectfully accepting that it exists. It exists. And of course the last one is by praising it when we see it in others. Right? If we see somebody else who's done something very devotional, instead of being in an envious mentality, usually an envious mentality is if somebody's getting recognition, then we start thinking of ways how to make them look bad so we can look better. Because that's envy. That's just part of our conditioning. But instead of pointing out a defect in the person, we praise. We praise it, not artificially. Sometimes devotees can go overboard. They can sometimes say, oh Prabhu, you are the purest, most knowledgeable, and I'm simply giving my life to you. I'm surrendering to you everything that I have, and you deserve so much. And sometimes devotees can, they can lay it on a little thick. That's not what the verse is speaking about. But the verse is, when you see it, when you point it out, then there's a certain benefit to praising it. In fact, in Chaitanya Bhagavat, there's a nice pastime of Lord Chaitanya. Can I have a little water?
Yes.
Lord Chaitanya was once approached by a Brahmin, and this Brahmin had told him that previously I saw Vaishnavas. Previously I saw you, Lord Chaitanya. He said, I did not suitably respect Vaishnavas. I have committed offense and I spoke ill of Vaishnavas. How can I rectify myself? He was a Brahmin from Kulinagram. Approached Lord Chaitanya and fell at his feet. And Lord Chaitanya gave an example. He said, when a person willingly drinks poison, then the poison, of course, will have its effect. But if one can counteract the effects of drinking poison by drinking the ambrosial nectar of immortality, and when you drink the ambrosial nectar of immortality, it can counteract the effects of whatever poison one has drunk. So similarly, if one has spoken ill of Vaishnava, either knowingly or unknowingly, but have realized I spoke ill of a Vaishnava, and Lord Chaitanya said that the best way is with the same tongue that you spoke ill of a Vaishnava, you can counteract the effects, because he asked Lord Chaitanya, what do I do? How do I counteract the effects of what I've said about Vaishnavas? Lord Chaitanya said, use the same tongue that you use to drink poison, to drink the nectar of mortality, or in other words, glorify the Vaishnavas. Find something, a quality in the Vaishnava that you can say something good about, and this will counteract effects of. The question was about unknowing. When it's knowingly done and maliciously done, there are more severe consequences. But no need to go into that. That's not really what we're going to talk about tonight. Consequences of aparads. But we are talking about envy because we're talking about creating an environment or an atmosphere that is very conducive for revealing one's mind in confidence and inquiring confidentially from others about spiritual life. And the conducive atmosphere is when everybody understands how to control the urge to speak about others. Because there is a natural proclivity to speak about others. It's very natural. In fact, it's our constitutional nature. I mean, when you read Srimad Bhagavatam, you read Krishna book especially, when Uddhava comes and visits the residents of Braj, the gopis start talking about Krishna continuously. What is he doing? Does he remember us? He must be so much more absorbed now that he's in the city. Does he ever think of us, girls? And Nanda Maharaj is asking Uddhava, does he remember his parents? Does he think about us? Does he know? They talk, and quite perpetually talk about someone, which is our natural proclivity, is to talk about Krishna. But unfortunately, if we don't have that natural proclivity, that spontaneous attraction to always speak about Krishna, then the proclivity to speak about somebody will come out, and when two people get together and Krishna's not really an important subject to talk about, then very soon you'll find yourself talking about someone. And and this is what Bhaktivinoda Thakur talks about. There are different types of prajalpa. One of them is unnecessarily talking, about others. Another is gossip. Another is useless arguments. There's a whole list of topics which come under the category of unnecessarily talking about others. So I was going to read, that's my little introduction to what I was going to read about. I was going to read from Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur's Sri Bhaktyaloka on his essay. First, he speaks a little bit something about it in his essay on patience. I'm not going to speak about the topic of patience because it's a very broad topic. And that's not what we're going to... But he brings up impatience, and just a short section I want to read, where he speaks about this. He quotes the verse, which is the first verse of Upadeshamrita. Vacho vegam manasakota vegam, jiva vegam. Yes, you know this verse? I know you know it. You were quoting it. Were you quoting it? Yes. Yes? Can you record it? Help her out, friend. Go ahead, Radha, we're going to help her out. Yes. So he's talking about the urges. A sober person who can tolerate the urge to speak, first one, the mind's demands, the actions of anger, and the urges of the tongue, belly, and genitals is qualified to make disciples all over the world. And then he describes there's 6 types of urges. And the first is one he speaks about is the urge to speak. And he says with a desire, something here doesn't really sit right. I wish I could have discussed it with the person who translated. With a desire to speak more, a person becomes talkative. I don't know, something doesn't sound right about that translation. But if speech is not regulated, then enmity arises from talking about others. So it's got to be regulated, because if we don't regulate our speech, then, as we said before, natural proclivity is to speak about Krishna, and when people get together, if Krishna is not a very important topic for the dialogue, then we have to know what to speak about others when we talk about them. Why? And all these motives are discussed by Bhaktivinoda Thakur. That's all I'm going to read from that section, because now I'm going to read from this section on Prajalpa. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur explains that there are godless Prajalpas. There are godly Prajalpas, but it's not Prajalpa, it's Jalpana. Jalpana means to talk. And there's godly talk, which is to speak about Krishna. Those are godly talks, or to chant Hare Krishna. And he speaks a little bit about the godly talks, which are just simply connect all those talks which are connected to Krishna. But godless Prajalpas are impediments to devotional service. There are many types. Useless talks, arguments, gossip, debates, fault-finding in others, speaking falsehoods, blaspheming devotees, and worldly talk are all called Prajalpa. There's a lot of them there. I'll read it one more time. Useless talks, arguments, gossip, debates, fault-finding in others, speaking falsehoods, blaspheming devotees, and worldly talk are all called Pajapa. Now, as we explained before, Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he elaborated on all of these topics in his essays. Bhaktivinoda Thakur was known for establishing and spreading Krishna consciousness amongst householders. And his Namhata was taking the holy name, and he describes in Godruba Kalpatavi and how a person becomes can take the holy name and go out and distribute the holy name and give it to others. And he has a whole marketplace for the holy name and many persons who are all employed in the marketplace, and he specifically mostly aimed his instructions to householders. So why would he take so much time to detail these things? Obviously, because there was a need. There was a need to discuss these topics because the propensity was there even in the times of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So he talks about useless talk is extremely detrimental. Useless talk. I think we can easily understand. I don't want to spend much time on. We can easily understand what useless talk is. Many of us, I'm sure, can identify it. We may not be able to. Sometimes we may be better identifying it in somebody else than ourselves. That's, of course, that's the nature of that fault-finding mentality. Fault-finding mentality is, if I can find it in somebody else, it's a lot easier for me because then I don't have to see it in myself. But if I can see in others, what's one way to avoid? It's one way to be very advanced. I don't have any faults because I spend my time and looking for it in others and correcting in others or speaking about it in others. So useless talk could be something that we may easily identify in somebody else, but we also have to try to look. And as we said last week, Bhaktivinoda Thakur he's addressing this book to sadhakas. And he specifically uses the word work in reference to internal work. Because a sadhaka is somebody, householders, they have their work. 7th canto, 14th chapter of the Bhagavatam, Narada Muni is giving his instructions to householders. And he tells them that every householder has to find a means of livelihood to maintain body and soul together, and family members, and how he has to work. He also says, Yavat Riyeta Jachanam Tavat Svatsam Hidehinam Adikam Yogamanyitas Tenam Dandamaharti. He also says, one should aspire for as much wealth necessary to maintain body and soul together. And one who aspires for more than that is considered to be a thief and deserves to be punished by the laws of nature. So, 7th canto, 14th chapter. It's very, very relevant instructions, of course. That's another tough one sometimes for people to deal with. Because someone can easily say, well, I need it because if I don't have it, I'd be so disturbed. So therefore, that's my criteria for needing something. If I simply get what I need, then... But we have to learn how to distinguish between what we need and what we want. And that's the kind of work a sadhaka needs to do. A sadhaka needs to actually look internal and decide how much do I actually need and how much do I really want and how to differentiate between the two. But the benefit the householder has is a householder understands that because I live, maintain body and soul so that I can hear and chant about Krishna, then if I maintain my body and soul together, accepting whatever is necessary for hearing and chanting about Krishna and taking responsibility for myself, my family members, then the result is when you start getting some taste for hearing and chanting, then Vishaya Vinivartate Naraharasya Dehina. Then you get some taste and you immediately realize that you don't need as much as you thought you needed. You could be satisfied with something, with Krishna consciousness, so satisfied with Krishna consciousness, then you can define the limits easily about what you need and what you want. It's a science, and Narada Muni did instruct Yudhishthira Maharaj in that science, in the 14th chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. But nonetheless, these topics, useless talk, there are talks which are required as a householder. There are many talks he has to engage in for making money, for dealing with family members. He has to speak about many different people, especially his family members. He has to speak people he works with. He has to deal that we spoke about last week in our dealings in performing our duty. But here he says useless talk is extremely detrimental. Practicing devotees should discuss topics of Lord Hari in the association of other devotees, and remember Hari's name, his form, his qualities and pastimes without wasting time. That's pretty much how he defines useless talk. I'm not going to go into so much about useless talk because I think it's pretty easy to understand what is useless talk. Argument, he says, is a prajalpa that is adverse to devotional service. He appeared in Navadvip, which was the center of learning, where everybody was very proud of their knowledge. They studied Nyaya, studied logic and argument. And amongst many of the Bhattacharyas and professors in Navadvip at the time, they studied scripture for one reason only. Not to become Krishna conscious. They studied scripture so they could defeat others in argument. That was everybody did. It was the center of learning, and everybody was absorbed in arguing this. Many of the students, they would accept their teacher. The teacher would teach them of logic, teach them argument, and then they would debate. So Lord Chaitanya, in order to capture so many followers, he had to become an expert. Well, not had to become, he is it. But he had to present himself as an expert logician and debater. And the nature of a person who is accustomed to arguments and debates is that even today, many people have this mentality that the truth is not so important as being right. And sometimes people, when they get into an argument, they just have to be right. And it's not a question of whether it's true or not true. It's just, for the sake of argument, I'm going to continue this argument because I have to prove that I'm right. And this is specifically the type of argument which Bhaktivinoda Thakur is talking about here. Useless arguments. Argument is called prajalpa. It's adverse to devotional service. All the arguments of the followers of Nyaya and Vaisheshika are simply godless quarrels. Of course, Lord Chaitanya, what he did is he would defeat everybody in argument. And people, and many of the Vaishnavas who took their birth to assist Lord Chaitanya in his pastimes, they were also attracted to Lord Chaitanya, to Nyang Nimai Pandit, but because they were covered by the Yogamaya potency, they didn't know that Nimai Pandit was the Supreme Lord. And they couldn't figure out why they were so attracted to him. And many times the Vaishnavas would say amongst themselves, if only Nimai would become a devotee, I would follow him completely. He was so attracted because of his beauty, for his charm. But he had this one tendency, he loved to argue. Sometimes he would see, for instance, Mukunda, he liked to argue with Mukunda. And Mukunda would get into an argument with him in the street, and gradually in due course of time, when Lord Chaitanya would come to start to get into an argument with the Vaishnavas, they started avoiding him, going to the other side of the street. And some of them would start saying that Nimai, he's like a tax collector. He says when he comes and he grabs you, he just doesn't let you go, and he starts getting into an argument. But he was doing that because he wanted to defeat everybody, because everybody would, respect him. And then he became a teacher of logic, teacher of Sanskrit grammar. And then having the largest following possible after young Nimai met his spiritual master Ishwar Puri, when he returned, and he converted them all into Vaishnavas, all of his students. Had them tie up their books and no longer interested in them anymore. Simply go out and chant. But there's a lot to say about arguments as a Prajalpa. And he said, all the arguments of the followers of Nyaya and Vaisheshika are simply godless quarrels. They do not yield any result other than wasting the mind's strength and increasing one's restlessness. In the Vedas it is said, Naisha Tarkena Matir Apaneya. This intelligence cannot be attained by argument. A little bit about argument. There's not enough time to go into all the details that are here. If you like, you can read it. But we want to talk about controlling the tendency of speaking about others. So I'm going to go to that because this is what this topic is, the urge, controlling the urge to speak. When can we speak about others, and when should we not speak about others? When we speak about others, what should we say? And when should we just realize that I'm not qualified to speak about others because I still have envy in my heart, I still have pride, I still have hatred and malice, and better I not speak about others. These things are going to be discussed here. Useless arguments, this is one last about useless arguments. Useless arguments arise from envy or pride, aversion or attachment to sense gratification, or foolishness or self-pride. Quarrelsome people also become intoxicated by useless arguments. While discussing topics of the Lord and his devotees, the practicing devotees should always be careful to avoid useless arguments. Oh, okay. Talking without reason about other people is extremely adverse to devotional service. Many people talk about others to establish their own reputation. Being envious, some people are accustomed to discuss others' character. I don't need to give samples, do I? I mean, we can all easily understand that these things are outlined because there's a definite tendency to talk about others, talk about others' character. And here it says most people talk about others to establish their own reputation. Why do they talk about others? Because if I can make somebody look bad, I look better. Easy. And the more people I can make look bad in my circle, then the better I look all around in my circle. So why do I? Because I'm looking for faults. Prabhupada once gave an example that's looking for faults in devotees who are serious, sincere practitioners of Bhakti Yoga, this is simply like criticizing a person who's washing his hands for having dirty hands. You know, can you imagine? Somebody's standing at the sink and, you know, the soap container of washing hands. Somebody comes over and says, "Your hands are filthy." Yeah. But I'm washing them. So this same way to look for fault or to criticize others, we have to examine, are they actually washing their hands? Are they taking to the process? Are they sincerely trying to avoid fault finding? Are they sincerely trying to hear and chant about Krishna? I mean, we are all of us, we're fallible. We're weak. You know, we're Manda Subanda Matayo Mata Bhagi Hupartita. In the age of Kali, men are quarrelsome, lazy, misguided, unlucky, and above all, always disturbed. You know, we all have fallen tendencies, but for our great fortune, Lord Chaitanya came as Patita Pavana to uplift them all who's fallen. So if at least we can begin with ourselves and saying, yes, I see that I have certain tendencies. I should try to look within my own heart to see what I can do to avoid this fault-finding tendency, looking for faults in others, to see if there's still envy, pride, you know, I want recognition. And then he's saying the same here. Many people talk about this to establish their own reputation. Being envious, some people are accustomed to discuss others' character. And the minds of those who are busy in such topics can never be fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. This is the consequence. The consequence is we're practitioners of Bhakti Yoga trying to become Krishna conscious, but the mind of a person who's always absorbed in seeing faults in others can never be fixed on Krishna. Mind is always disturbed. You know, because sometimes it becomes like so overwhelming. It's like an obsession, and you can't stop it. It just goes there. But for devotees, they have this one hope that at least they know it's a fault. You know, I oftentimes quote that verse in the Chaitanya Charitamrita, that the path is difficult and I am blind, and my feet are slipping again and again. Yes. Yes. You preach on this verse a lot? Yes. What do you do when you're slipping? What, to beat others over the head with? Need a stick of mercy, extra support. Yeah. At least, you know, we should try to understand that these qualities, they need to be overcome. But we can't do it alone. We cannot do it on our own strength. This is one of when Krishna says, Yoginam apisavishan magatinam taratmana. So of all yogis, he who abides in me in great faith, worshipping in devotional service, is most intimately united with me in yoga. And he's the highest of all. With Krishna specifically speaking about that devotee who knows he can't do it himself. He knows. What is it? And all activities just depend upon me, work under my protection. Such devotional service, you should be conscious of me. If you are conscious of me, you'll cross over all the obstacles of conditional life by my grace. But if you do not work in such consciousness and act through false ego, not hearing me, Krishna says you will be lost. We can't do it ourselves. We need strength, a source of strength outside ourselves. A devotee never thinks that by my own strength, by my own intelligence, by my own abilities, as soon as he thinks like that, he's going to have a very difficult time. He knows that I need a source of strength outside of myself to become strong. And I need mercy. So, although the mind is looking for faults, mind sees all these things, and until we actually become purified, we have to learn how to practice restraint, at least control the mind. So, many people talk about others to establish their own reputation. Being envious, some people are accustomed to discuss others' character. The minds of those who are busy in such topics can never be fixed on the lotus feet of Krishna. Talking about others should be rejected in all respects. But now he's going to give some. But in the practice of devotional service, there are many favorable topics that are faultless, even though they are about others. In order to completely renounce talking about others, one needs to live in the forest. So there's license. We can talk about others. Now let's hear about when to speak about others. There are two different types of practicing devotees, are the householders and the renunciates. Because the renunciates have no business whatsoever with sense enjoyment, they can give up talking about others in all respects. Unless, of course, you're a renunciate and happen to be in the position of managing an ISKCON. Like Prabhupada didn't want GBCs to be sannyasis. He wanted the householders to do it. But anyways, that's besides the point. This is during the time of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. Sometimes, unfortunately, when you're in a position of you do have to speak about others, but still these same principles need to be followed. When to speak about others and when not to. Because renunciates have no business whatsoever with sense enjoyment, they give up talking about others in all respects. But because a householder is engaged in earning, saving, protecting, and maintaining the family, he cannot completely give up talking about others. It is best for him to live in a Krishna-conscious family. Best. Ideal. When all one's material activities are related with Krishna, then even his unavoidable talk about others becomes sinless and a part of devotional practice in relation to Krishna. That's easy to understand. When all the business is connected to Krishna, then there's no sinful talks there, because earning one's livelihood, maintaining family members, this is all done ultimately for utilizing one's time as much as possible for hearing and chanting about Krishna. There's that verse, Kamasya Nindya Pratya Labojiveti Yavata Jivasya Tattva Jigasya Nato Yascha Hikarmabi. Life's desire should never be directed towards sense gratification. One should desire to live only because the human form of life enables to inquire about the absolute truth. This should be the goal of all of his work. This is the goal. This is the purpose for working. To maintain the body so that we can use the body for hearing and chanting about Krishna. Always like using this little simple example. I was lecturing in Taiwan, and Taiwan, they really like gadgets. Of course, they like gadgets everywhere. And I was using this example. I was speaking on this particular topic. And that human life is meant to be used to its full potential, which means to hear and chant and to know what is the goal of human life, to establish one's eternal relationship with Krishna. And I was given the example that whenever somebody is given a gift, then naturally if somebody gives you a gift and it's a valuable gift, you want to use it to its full potential. Natural. And I was giving them an example. I said, just like if somebody gave you an iPhone, well, now what is it? iPhone 14. If somebody gives you an iPhone 14, right, it's a gift. Then you think, wow, what does the iPhone 14 do that the iPhone 13 doesn't do? You immediately start looking it up, right? What things can I do now when I have an iPhone 14? They really liked this analogy I was using. It wasn't 14 though. I think that back then it was around 6. But the point is when you give something, somebody gives you something valuable and it's a gift, then the natural inclination is you want to know how to use this to its full potential. So the same thing, if one is given a human form of life, an intelligent person should understand, how do I use the human form of life to its full potential? What do I do? We have to look it up. What can the human form of life do that the animals and everything else can't do? Full potential means, and that verse describes, not sense gratification, but to inquire about the absolute truth. So when the householder lives with his family, and the goal, the objective, is to utilize one's time as much as possible for hearing and chanting about Krishna, then everything else becomes what's called gona dhamma. It's a support. It's a support to the hearing and chanting about Krishna. What's the word?
Mukhya.
Mukhya dhamma, yes. So work becomes a support. Maintaining family becomes a support. It all becomes a support to becoming Krishna conscious. So therefore, it is best for him to live in a Krishna conscious family. When all one's material activities are related with Krishna, then even his unavoidable talk about others becomes sinless and a part of devotional practice in relation to Krishna. He should not talk about others in a way that is detrimental to anyone. He should talk about others only whatever little is necessary in his Krishna conscious family. He should not talk about others without reason. Without reason. So there has to be a good reason for it. Of course, if we all want to justify, we could find a good reason for any discussion about anybody. But this is now going to be expanded on. Moreover, when a guru enlightens his disciple on some topic, then unless he occasionally talks about others, his instructions may not be clear. Now he's going to give an example. When previous Mahajans have talked about others in this way, there is merit in such talk, not fault. As Shukadeva Goswami said in Srimad Bhagavatam, I'm not going to quote the Sanskrit verse. He's quoting a verse, Shukadeva Goswami, in the second canto of the Bhagavatam. He talks about the lifetime of envious householders. What do envious householders do? He speaks, this is second canto, first chapter, third and fourth verse. The lifetime of such envious householders is passed at night either in sleeping, or in sex indulgence, and in the daytime, either in making money or maintaining family members. Persons devoid of Atma Tattva do not inquire into the problems of life, being too attached to the fallible soldiers like the body, children, and wife. Although sufficiently experienced, they still do not see their inevitable destruction. These are two verses spoken by Shukadeva Goswami. Shukadeva Goswami is speaking about others in a general way. He's not naming them. He's not pointing out who they are. He's just talking about envious householders. Why is he pointing this out to Parikshit Maharaj? He's pointing it out because he's trying to establish a point that, look, don't be like that. Sometimes people don't, if they hear about all the positive things, sometimes they need to hear about negative things. You should avoid these things. Don't be like the envious householder who only sleeps at night and has sex life, and during the day only works to maintain his family, simply to maintain fallible soldiers. This is what Shukadeva Goswami is preaching. So he's speaking about others, envious householders. There's more to life than living like this. So that's one merit for such talk about others. Then here's another one. He's going to talk about somebody. Lord Chaitanya is going to talk about somebody, but he's not going to name him. But he's going to talk about somebody whereas those who hear know who he's talking about. Although Shukadeva Goswami talks about the materialist in order to instruct his disciple, he is not considered a Prajalpi. Therefore, such activities should be considered beneficial. Again, in order to instruct his own disciples, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu spoke about pseudo-renunciates in the following words from the Chaitanya Charitamrita. He's talking about pseudo-renunciate. And the Lord says, I cannot tolerate seeing the face of a person who has accepted the renounced order of life, but who still talks intimately with a woman. There are many persons with little in their possession who accept renounced order of life like monkeys. They go here and there engaging in sense gratification and speaking intimately with women. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, my mind is not under my control. It does not like to see anyone in the renounced order who talks intimately with women. So, here he's teaching his renunciates. The example was in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Chota Haridas, for his slight offense of going to seeking Mahiti's sister, Madhavi. And his slight offense, excuse me, I don't know how to turn, okay. He forbidden permissive association. And he's speaking about somebody, and he's severely speaking about it to teach others. Again, for teaching, sometimes it is necessary. And the last example, I won't read it. It's just because I think there might be some questions and I want to leave a little time for questions. Maitreya is giving an example. He's speaking about somebody specific. He's speaking about Venu Maharaj. And speaking about him, pointing him out how he is a very degraded personality, so that one should know not to be like this person. So Maitreya needed to speak about someone in this way. He spoke to his audience to instruct them. This is not prajalpa. The practicing devotee normally discusses ancient history and the association of devotees. Occasionally they talk about non-devotees. Such talk is always auspicious and favorable to devotional service. But those who talk about others while influenced by devotional impediments like envy, hatred, pride, and distinction are offenders at the feet of Bhakti Devi. So we can just assume, as by hearing these instructions, that what Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying is that when the Guru is enlightening his disciples, sometimes for the sake of enlightening them, he has to point out, here, this is something that you should see and try to avoid. But he's not pointing it out because of his own pride, of his own fault-finding tendency. He has to instruct, and therefore he brings this topic up. That is a qualification to speak about others. Otherwise, There's no necessity to speak about others in a fault-finding way, to bring out their bad qualities. There is something here, though. Wait a minute. That I missed. Yes, I missed this. I'm sorry. This is an important point. Therefore, when the previous acharyas have personally set example and taught others, how will we be benefited by acting contrary to their instruction? And if one discusses in this way the improper behavior current in a religious sect or amongst the general public, then such talk is not adverse to devotional service. Even if one sometimes talks about a particular person, there is no fault. So somebody may hear this and think, well, there it is. We can bring up if there's something, we see a defect in a religious sect. Prabhupada did this, although Prabhupada was very expert when he was pointing out. I mean, he spoke very strongly about sometimes the Mayavadis, the impersonalists. He spoke very heavily about them. But Prabhupada was very careful that he would not speak about them personally, publicly. If somebody was asking a question about, what do you think about so-and-so? Prabhupada would say, what is his philosophy? And Prabhupada would make them repeat the whole philosophy that the person was propounding. And Prabhupada then would just defeat the philosophy and never defeat the person. He's very, very careful in doing this. Sometimes in confidential surroundings with his followers, he would say certain things about certain, like, yogis. But especially Vivekananda, Dhritarayana. But the public, Prabhupada would never do that. Would never do that. And so here it says also that sometimes it may, such occasional talk about non-devotees, excuse me, no, that's not what I'm looking for. If one discusses in this way the improper behavior current in a religious sect or amongst the general public, then such talk is not adverse to devotional service. It's been a long time since I read this. Sorry, I wasn't conscious of all the different details that were there. But maybe I should leave it open if anybody has any questions. There are more things I can say, but I don't want to lose the time for questions. Yes?
Thank you so much for speaking so eloquently on such appropriate topics. I'd like to ask a question, sort of summarizing from the two lessons. Last time I understood that if we interact with the devotees in a loving manner, it is satsanga, and if we interact externally under the same circumstances with non-devotees, if we do it out of duty, it's not satsanga. But and this is all on the basis of priti, of love. And my question would be, how do we develop priti or love for the devotees, especially those we are envious of?
How to develop love? I mean, that's the essence of our Krishna consciousness philosophy, is how to develop love. The best way to develop love, I'm going to use the word affection, because that's what Bhaktivinoda Thakur uses. Priti defines it as affection. And he speaks about affectionate relationships. And the reason why I'm using the word affection is because Dadati Patagrinati Guyamagyati Prichati directly answers that question. That there are 6 exchanges that are supposed to take place between devotees. And these 6 exchanges of giving gifts, accepting gifts, giving prasadam, accepting prasadam, inquiring confidentially and revealing one's mind in confidence, these are the means by which one actually begins to increase one's affection for devotees. Now, it's an advanced position, and it needs to be practiced. I mean, just to give you an example, when we're talking about, friendly relationships between 2 Madhyama Bhaktas, Bhaktivinoda Thakur describes that between Madhyama Bhaktas, who are freed from envy, who are advanced in spiritual path, their affection for their friends is so profound that he describes as 4 criteria that exist in loving relationships between friends. One is called Atma Buddhi. Atma Buddhi means my friend is more dear to me than my Atma, my own life. The second is called Ija Buddhi. Ija Buddhi means my friend is like a place of pilgrimage to me. This is how I think of my friend. Another one is called Mamata Buddhi. Mamata Buddhi means very, very confidential, close, intimate relationships with my friend. Mamata, he's mine, he's my friend. That means very dear to me. Mamata Buddhi, Atma Buddhi, Ija Buddhi, and Tirtha Buddhi. And Tirtha Buddhi, that's right, Tirtha Buddhi. Tirtha Buddhi means place of pilgrimage. Atma Buddhi, Mamata Buddhi, Ija Buddhi is worshipable. He's considered to be most worshipable. And these are the relationships that exist between advanced devotees. We may not be on that platform, but Rupa Goswami and Bhaktivinoda Thakur are describing how to develop affectionate relationships means that we have to start practicing this mood of, I have to find somebody that I can reveal my mind to in confidence. And when devotees begin to experience really loving, affectionate relationships, it wears off. Others become affected by it, just like we said before, that Lord Chaitanya, he came with his associates to teach others how to experience love by showing his loving relationships with his own associates. By seeing those loving relationships, seeing them, that one becomes very much attracted to want to have a loving relationship. If you don't see it, if you don't experience it, if it's just a theoretical ideal, then it's much more difficult to convince that it exists, others that it exists, and convince ourselves that it exists. So it starts with ourselves. I need to be the kind of person that wants to have a loving relationship. Therefore, let me find somebody I can give without expecting something in return. Let me find somebody I can reveal my mind to in confidence and inquire confidentially. Let me, if I can't find, at least pray for somebody that exists. And the more devotees begin thinking like that, instead of doing all the other things that we talked about avoiding today, then it will naturally develop. That's what bhakti is all about. It's developing a natural proclivity that's already there, innate. Devotional service means it's already there, innate within the soul. It simply has to be brought out by a catalyst. The catalyst is by associating with those who have the good qualities that we want. That's the best way to get it. And if we see there are others who have those qualities, then Tayete Sadava Sadvi Savasanga Vivajita. Lord Kapila Dev told his mother to seek out association with such devotees and become attached to them. Because if you become attached to them, then all the pernicious effects of material attachments will become destroyed.
Just a small follow-up question. So the principles will work even we start doing them out of duty?
Excuse me?
The principles of Dadati Pratikrinati will work even if we start doing them out of duty?
Yes, we do it out of duty, but as we said before, we do out of duty also with non-devotees. But what are we doing out of duty? in the association duties, devotees, we do it out of duty because it's the right thing to do. And if we practice it, because it's not there, it's not spontaneous yet. It's not going to be spontaneously manifest. It's still a cleansing of the heart has to take place. But pure devotional service is something that I have faith it exists. I have faith that faith respectfully and faithfully worship it as something that exists, and therefore let me aspire for it. And until we actually come to that platform, we have to practice it.
Thank you so much.
Some other question? Yes?
Thank you, dear Maharaj, for your association, for coming here, for your amazing lectures and kirtans. And my question is about, we were talking a lot about the principle Dadati Pratigrihnati, and I feel that I have some energy and time limits, so I can have this relationship with all the devotees, even if they are amazing person, and I have that is the way to progress in spiritual life. And my question is that I have two options: to have a formal relationship with all the devotees and trying to have this Dadati Pratigrihnati principles with all the devotees, but in a formal way, or to have 3-4 friends with whom I try to have some profound relationship.
Is the question
Yes.
one or the other?
Yes, maybe this is the wrong understanding.
No, it's not the wrong understanding at all. It only takes one relationship. It doesn't even need 3 or 4. It may not necessarily come, but it only takes one, because it's one relationship that changes the heart and deepens our attraction to bhakti. But we should not be pretentious and try to develop this kind of relationship with everybody that we know. As we said before, that's artificial. But we should know that such a relationship has to exist if we want to survive in the association of devotees. It's very difficult, and as we said before, if we don't have a kind of atmosphere that allows us to reveal our mind in confidence to somebody and to inquire confidentially, then unfortunately what we have observed over the society from the years that passed is many people, they disappear. And sometimes people don't even know they disappeared. Now, of course, this group is small enough to know. But if our preaching is successful and many people will start coming, it could come to the point that someday that we may forget that certain people were coming and that were not coming. And that we want to avoid that by all means. So we want to give people the kind of experience that they can trust, feel that this devotee is somebody they can trust. So your question is a very good question. It may not be able to do it with everybody. But if it takes one person to touch the heart, it takes one person to give us faith. And when a person has faith, then that is the best example to show others. And that's partially what's, even to a most significant degree, is more important than is teaching by one's own example. I have that kind of relationship. I can even say for myself, I have that kind of relationship. I don't have a lot, but I have it. And it's more dear to me than my own life. And I have that kind of relationship with certain Vaishnavas that I know I can say anything to them about myself and not be afraid of what's going to happen, who's going to hear about it. I know I have that. And it's not a lot. So I try to be an example. you should try to be an example also and find somebody that you have that relationship. And then relationships will become more natural because then people will come to you because you're capable of having such a relationship. Time will come, but at least that kind of relationship should be there. And with others, well, Rupa Goswami has given in the next verse of Upadeshamrita, he's given the criteria for how do we associate with devotees. For those who chant Hare Krishna, but they may not have the best character. They may not, Rupa Goswami says, well, what you do is you offer your obeisances in your mind, but keep yourself at a distance from them. Don't get too close to them. But don't criticize them, don't find fault with them. Offer respects in the mind. Then there are those who are initiated, and they are much more engaged in devotional service, and Rupa Goswami says with them, then you bow down and you offer your obeisances to them, and you just try to develop friendly relationships with them. Then there's that person who's fully engaged in bhakti, who's preaching the glories of pure devotional service, and he's completely devoid of the propensity of criticizing and finding fault with anyone. To that person, he says that we faithfully serve them and hear from them. So there's different categories of how to associate with devotees. They're not all one. And we have to see there are distinctions. And part of advancement in Krishna consciousness is learning how to discriminate and making distinctions, but not finding fault or criticizing. This is not our business. Lord Chaitanya he said, I beg all living entities, if you simply do not criticize and chant my holy name, then I will deliver anybody who just does not criticize other living entities and chants my holy name. I'll give him pure love of Godhead. So there's a lot more things I didn't have time I wanted to speak about to go into more details of your question, but there's one verse I want to quote about finding fault. There's a verse in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam that Srila Jiva Goswami gives in his Bhakti Sandarbha when he talks about respect for all living beings. He defines what is disrespect. And he says disrespect for living beings is when, and he quotes a verse from the 11th canto, sharp arrows that pierce the chest and approach the heart are not as painful as the arrows of insulting words of a materialist which enter the heart and become lodged there. He said specifically, arrows of insulting words become lodged in the heart and they're more painful than an arrow that pierces the chest. And he specifically states that a Vaishnava is somebody who never wants to cause pain to any living being. Never wants to cause pain. So insulting, criticizing is not necessary to be done. And Lord Chaitanya says we should be very careful, we should discriminate, and do not unnecessarily cause pain to any living being. So I was some point that I wanted to make, and I brought that out now. It wasn't really directly to your question. But the point is, we should try to be a good example and have relationships with others and teach by our own example what it is to have a meaningful devotional relationship. And if we can do that, then others will learn from it and it will grow naturally, organically, spontaneously. But we still have to make distinctions how we deal with others. And Rupa Goswami has given, yes, one standard is from a distance we respect them, another is we offer obeisance, another one is we faithfully serve them, and for those who are completely devoid of the propensity of criticizing others, we serve them. And therefore we should make these distinctions. Any other questions? Last question? Yes.
Thank you very much for the wonderful lecture and the kirtans. So, when we discriminate the different levels of advancement of the others, is there any difference between just seeing a mistake or a bad character and find faulting?
Fine. What was the last one?
And fault finding. Sorry.
Is there a difference between seeing a mistake and fault
fault
finding?
finding? Yes. How do we know if we're just seeing something that we don't like, or this is just our mind, which is only fault finding?
Well, easiest thing to do is to ask somebody that you have confidence in, and ask them: is this particular incident? Am I simply seeing a fault, or is there some substance of what I'm saying? Because if you ask somebody that you have faith in, that you trust in, then they're the best persons to help the situation, rather than you having to go and, because you might take the risk of correcting somebody and actually it's something in your heart. But the safest thing to do is to go to somebody that you have a confidential relationship and say, can I say something confidential? I see something like this about this and this person, and I know that I have a tendency to find faults, and I want to check within myself, because on my heart I can't distinguish between the two. I'm not advanced enough, and I need help from somebody who can help me. And if you ask in this way, without being pointing out it as the fault, then that person can help you. That maybe it is something that is wrong, that was done wrong, and it needs to be corrected. Then you have to find the right person who can correct it. You may not be the right person to correct it. So that's the safest thing to do. And if you don't have somebody you can go to, then that's the whole purpose of this talk. Everybody has to have somebody they can go to. Unfortunately, many devotees, they become very isolated. And if the kind of atmosphere, as we said last week, you said that if this kind of atmosphere is one is fearful about revealing one's mind in confidence, then nobody will reveal their mind in confidence, and people will just kind of disappear, and and people will be afraid to open their minds and have open, loving relationships. But if they can see that there is an atmosphere of Vaishnavas who know the principles about avoiding just unnecessary discussions about others, then it fosters loving relationships. It fosters closer relationships, fosters encouragement. All these things can come. They can grow naturally and not forced, because you can't legislate faith. That's one thing I've learned 50 years practicing Krishna consciousness movement, is that you cannot legislate somebody to have faith in somebody else, saying, you must have faith. No, it just doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. Faith, Prabhupada used to say, what is it? One should not demand respect. So one commands respect by his example. Commands. Not command by, I guess it comes out when it's translated, command may sound like, but he commands it by his example instead of demanding. You cannot legislate faith. That's one thing that everybody, voluntary spirit, Prabhupada explained in one letter in 1972, a very, very important letter. Prabhupada talked about leadership in our society. And he says the voluntary spirit is individual and should never be in any way encroached upon. He says the spirit of voluntary service has to be inspired by exemplary leadership. And when its spirit of voluntary service is inspired, then people will naturally want to come forward and strictly follow part of our process of Krishna consciousness. So, legislating is not something that we can do. But fortunately, there are many exemplary devotees. And we have to learn how to see the good qualities in them and see how to take shelter in their example and their instructions. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay. All right. I should stop here. We have an early flight early tomorrow morning.
We have a train with Prasadam, like last time.
Yes. I guess, okay.